The story starts the same.
A girl walks into a comic book store. I mean, it's a stereotype, it's a trope. Everyone stops and looks and is amazed, right? That's tongue-in-cheek and not actually what happens, but a little bit it is.
For women involved in the comic book culture, their position can often seem unclear.
I went to a store in Calgary with my husband, and I was totally ignored. And he doesn't even like comic books, but they went up to him. So it's just that stereotype that men like comic books. And so we ended up leaving, and I don't think I got anything. But I hear that experience from a lot of women, like they get ignored in comic book stores. They just don't get the same kind of treatment, or they don't feel like they're welcome.
Welcome or not, women are now a part of the comic book world. The myth of the boys' club is being tested. The stereotypes are being exposed. Today, it's time to draw a clear picture of girls in the comic book world. Getting a grip on comic book culture is a tricky task, even for experts. Because it's not just about the people who write the books, nor is it just about the people who read them. It's about the history of the genre, and the world this growing subculture exists in.
It's a little bit trite, but there's tradition, right? Comic books date back to, the very early 1900s, and that was a very different time. Batman used to have a gun, for example, but then in the 30s it became very gauche to have this notionally like this inspiring hero running around shooting things with a gun, so suddenly Batman doesn't have a gun. And sometimes those like seemingly minor or tweaks that occur just within the moment become institutionalized. Still Batman is running around without guns. And so bringing that back to the question of gender, it's an obvious statement, but our understanding of what women are capable of, sort of as a culture has shifted over the last 100 years, right? And even after the Second World War, there was still this sort of understanding that women belong in the kitchen. And since adventures can't happen in the kitchen, like women having adventures it's not a fit. And so we have lots of superheroes which have these huge followings, long, beautiful, interesting histories, just with no space for women in them. But I feel like comic books and comic book fandom, more than maybe other kinds of fandom, is really built on a respect for and an appreciation of tradition and of history, right? When we imagine a comic book nerd, it's someone who can tell you what happened to, Batman's secret ring in this 1973 special printing of a comic. And that sort of appeal to tradition, that sort of desire to respect a historical narrative, brings with it the absence of women that occurred back then. So even if now an author says, I want to tell this story that does this great important thing about women, it can often feel like it comes out of nowhere. It can just feel completely sort of severed off from the tradition or the history that we believe fans value.
It's more than just the writing that holds a tradition. The very look of mainstream comics today is inspired by artists of the past.
But it started in the 90s. There was a big boom because there was more companies, especially with Image. You got more artists working, and then everyone started pushing themselves because there's more artwork, more freedom to play with new characters. So ever since then, I think art has gone tenfold, hundredfold better. So it's a lot tougher for new artists now.
I know people rag on Robert Liefeld a lot, but, he's responsible for a very specific kind of look, and, right?
Well, no, you can rag on it as much as you want, but he's one of the founders, and back in the day, pretty much, that company, or his section of the company helped Image in terms of like, exposure, keeping a lot of the other, holding all the companies together at that point, and pushing the artwork.
Tradition is important, but it takes more to entice a reader than respect for canon. For female fans, comics of the past have often been lacking on several points.
Like, when women read comics, they do see, how women are portrayed in comics, specifically, the issue with women in refrigerators, the issues of how women are physically portrayed, the TNA poses, right?
For those who don't know, the term women in refrigerators refers to a specific moment in comic book history. The Green Lantern's girlfriend was killed, chopped up into pieces, and placed in a refrigerator. This gruesome death was one of the many examples of how female characters are often killed off to forward the plot of the male protagonist. Ergo the name, Women in Refrigerators.
The other issue was Amanda Waller, right? Like, she was, one of the very few women of size. Like, there's men in comics who are big, tall, fat, short, all ranges. They're grotesque. They're, you have the Penguin and you have, gorgeous Luke Cage, right? So you have this huge range for men, whereas women, you had Amanda Waller, who was, a bigger woman, and in the new 52, she's now a very slender woman, and it's kind of like, no size, you're bigger, you're not allowed. So, or you're, you can't be portrayed. Her nickname was The Wall, right? And she had such an incredible backstory, so.
Complaints like these aren't going unheard. In fact, because of this, creators like Amy Chu of Alpha Girl Comics are trying a new way of drawing female characters.
We're looking to do engaging stories with strong female protagonists,
and they're like,
and it just doesn't turn off anybody or offend anybody, normal people. For the most part, what sells for a certain group is your typical cover with a beautiful girl with boobs, and we just want to test a market where there is no beautiful girl with boobs. There's just a regular human being, a female, on the cover without all that going on. See how that does. And unfortunately, we seem to be losing that battle, but I don't care. We're doing what we do. It's really sad to me. I've done a couple of these conventions now where I will always get a couple women who walk by and they'll stop and they'll stare. I'm like, wow, finally we see a cover with a woman without, exposing herself. So it's kind of sad to me that is actually the selling point. That's how people notice.
Women have indeed noticed, because it's not just in the comic books that the problem lies. Mainstream media presents just as narrow a view of the female ideal.
It's really challenging for women because the representations of women in the media tend to be fairly negative. Super sexy, hot, we have to live up to all of those ideals and expectations, and that doesn't translate very well into women being in leadership roles. So we tend to think that women who are leaders are aggressive, and all of those sort of negative connotations around strong, assertive women makes them not very womanly. And so there's this real tension between women and how they're represented and what they're actually able to do in the quote-unquote real world. You can't be what you can't see. So if you're not seeing representations of women, so in your case, comic book authors, out in the public discourse, then it's really hard for women to pick up that as a career.
And this takes us back to the big question. There's this funny little stereotype that the comic book industry is the ultimate boys' club. But is this really the case? For answers like these, we have to go to the mecca of the comic book world, Comic-Con.
This is just a little lineup.
Well, after stepping onto the floor, we can already see quite a few myths disappearing. There seem to be plenty of women here, buying comics, reading comics, and drawing them. So how do these women of the industry feel about this boys' club perception?
This is a loaded question. I don't know how other people have responded to this. I love what I'm doing, but you really do have to have a tough skin. Both George and I, we are Harvard MBAs. We're coming from fairly male-dominated industries, finance and whatnot, and biotech.
If you flip that over,
and I'm trying to be nice about this
so it's up to you.
because I love the people in this business. I've had nothing but, people have been very supportive and whatever, but it is more of a boys' club than anything I've ever seen on Wall Street. And I'm talking very specifically about certain genres. I'm not talking about, let's say, indie comics where we're celebrating the, self-narrative and things like that. I'm talking about the superhero genre, etc.
In case this isn't clear, indie refers to independent publications, creators who self-publish and distribute their own work. Mainstream comics refers to a style of comics we typically see in the superhero genre. So when you think of Spider-Man, that's mainstream. When you think of Agnes Garboska's You Mean Zombie webcomic, well, that's indie. And speaking of indie, what do some of the independent creators think of this boys' club persona?
I am just one of the guys, so I don't have to deal with quite as much. But I can be really filthy. And yet I draw a children's book. I don't think that the comics industry is really accepting of women, especially indie creators. So I don't see it as much as some people say. I guess as far as mainstream comics, doing really cutesy stuff is not completely accepted yet, but that market is there, and it's growing. I think it's not being a woman in comics for me, it's having my style in comics.
You know what, there is actually a lot of women. I think what it is that there's just more guys getting into it than women still. Where small press, I find, does have a lot more women than mainstream. The only thing is that a lot of women, I guess, just don't draw the mainstream style, which is what the major companies want. They want that mainstream look. Where you see me, I got the cutesy art. Katie Cook, who's also at this convention, does very cutesy art, and it's harder to place us in the industry. So it has to be very all-age specific titles or something more whimsical. Then you can't just put us on like Batman, for example. And I think that is why there are less women in mainstream comics, is because there's not as many drawing in that style as there are males. But there's a lot of great female writers like Gail Simone. Oh, a mainstream artist is Nicola Scott. Like, she draws amazing mainstream style work, and she's one of my favorite artists and a wonderful person as well. So I guess the media says there are no women, but we are. Some are just a little hidden. There's a lot of female editors too, but that's not as public because they're behind the scenes type of thing. But there are women. We just hide a little every now and then.
It's a stereotype that's passing really quickly, and there are a lot of women in the industry who are, aggressive is the wrong word, but proactive about dispelling that myth. I mean, you've got people like Meredith Bran and Danielle Corsetto, who's two of my favorite women comic artists online. They are hilarious, and one of the things that you hear a lot about is they're wondering, why are we still doing women in comics panels? It's half of us here are women. It's not that unusual anymore at all, and I think we'd like it to not be seen as unusual or unattainable for girls. Like, come on, girls, come on in. The water's fine. I never once in comics felt that, somebody's looking at me because I'm the girl in the room, and I have in other jobs. So it's the way people approach the question too is really, really funny. Like, I'll get teenage girls will come up and say, what is it like being a woman in your industry? And I never know how to answer that question, and all I ever want to say is, my uterus has just never been a big part of my job.
Nor should it be, but thanks to the influence of indie creators, a new niche is being created. What's more, with the help of technology, getting stories out there is becoming that much easier.
I just wish more women would take the leap, because it's easier than ever for people to self-publish. I mean, I just went on about how difficult it was. It's very difficult if you want to make money, but if you want to actually just get your work out there, it's actually easier than ever. And if that's your end goal, people should really look into that, because you can publish digitally, on the web. Even if you wanted to just do a few copies, you can run to Kinko's and actually do print on demand and just get your book out there. It's just so much easier than back in the day when you had to do offset.
You have that printed here, or
so aspiring creators, aspiring women creators should totally do it. Even if they were not interested in staying in the business, dabble, experiment in the genre. You can do other things too, but self-publishing in general, in anything, fiction, even
That's actually an awesome
video. You've got YouTube, Ustream, all these things. So technology is a wonderful thing.
The online world has become more than just a tool for artists and writers. For the fans of comics, it's become a new place to connect.
I think you've pointed to a really important issue here, and that's the way that technology is facilitating opportunities for women to connect in non-traditional types of forums. So, other women who enjoy reading comic books, for instance. And frankly, we all love those characters, right? So I think that is signaling a shift, and women are accessing and using technologies in lots of non-traditional ways. Like, you can use technology, create a Facebook group, and have a website or whatever, and draw in other like-minded people.
Beyond being a place to connect, the internet has also become a place for fans to get proactive. Campaigns have been started to critique the way many female characters are drawn. One of the best examples is the Hawkeye Initiative, an online campaign where artists redraw the impossible poses of female characters, but replace the woman with Hawkeye. Another great website is the very educational Less Tits and Ass, More Kickin' Ass, a website dedicated to teaching artists how the female body actually works. Some movements have progressed beyond the internet, though. Elizabeth Pfeiffer, for example, now runs Ladies' Night, a comic book club for women who just like reading comic books.
I felt like I really wanted to talk to women face to face. I found that I was talking to a lot of women online who love comics, and I wanted to talk to women face to face about comics and why they love them, and and really just I'll let women know that they're welcome in comic book stores.
Finding your place in this world is never easy. Whether you're indie or mainstream, whether you're an artist or whether you're a fan, at the end of the day, we're all just looking for a way to connect. We have stories to tell, stories we want to see shared, about Amazon princesses and the heroes we dream about being. Now, the comic book world is far from a perfect place, but if there's one thing you can take away from this, it's that for some of us, it's already a place we call home.
Mrs. Jones was washing up on a Sunday afternoon, while the father and son were playing with the video in the other room. She thinks of when she was younger and the dreams that she forgot, like changing the world and living a life a little different than the one she got. So she looks into the mirror, throws her rags up on the floor, and she walks to the door, she's gonna find something more. There's the horizon, a whole new way to see. Just look at yourself and be what you always wanted to be. I know a man in another town who lives out on the street. He got tired of working for the same old faces and kissing the same old feet. He packed his bags, went walking, he was a man who was on his own. And one day just think about his daughter and son, starts feeling all alone. So he calls his wife in Memphis, says, honey, if you agree, just open the door and I'll come back for more. Life's a bitch and a bore. Just open the door and you're bound to find something more.